Okay, so my name is Janet Faulkner, and this is my presentation, Generation Screwed. And I don't have a clicker, so it's going to be kind of delayed and weird, but Jim, click.
That's Jim. Yeah, that's.
Bro. So this whole thing started off with somebody that had came to stay with my family. It was an exchange. He was an au pair from France, and he was not as outgoing as some other people that have stayed with us, and it kind of was interesting to me. So, like a futurist, I looked into it just out of curiosity, and that's really where this project was. It wasn't an assignment or anything like that. It was just something that I was kind of curious to understand a behavior that was a little bit different. And not to say that this person is an example of what I'm going to talk about, but this was my starting point. So when this person came, go ahead. I went ahead and we provided things that we thought that every person over the age of 21 would need. They would need a cell phone, they would need a car to get around town, and they would need internet access. And generally in America, you're good to go. If you have those three things, and if you don't have a curfew, you're all over it. We made sure that he was part of the au pair program, so we made sure that he went to facilitated monthly meetings to meet people. We made sure that he would enroll, although he did not enroll in a college course, and they're required to. And we also introduced him to really good-looking girls, and then we thought, well, okay, well, let's introduce him to really good-looking guys, and so we did that for a while, and about 4 or 5 months went by, and the one thing that never changed is he never left our house, which was different for me, because if I went over to another culture, I would want to go and look around at least a little bit, just a little bit, not just do the thing that I needed to do and to go back into the room. Whoa, Jim's getting crazy. I forget where I went. So we thought, well, maybe this is just a cultural difference. We thought maybe he's an introvert and I'm an extrovert, so we thought about the differences in personality in that regard. But introverts aren't necessarily shy people. They're just people that think, on a different scale. And I have a son that's an introvert, so I have a little bit of an understanding, not fully, but there is a difference in personality, but you still have friends. It's just a smaller niche group. But this particular person, although we offered all the different things that this particular person was interested in, it never got outside of, like I said, the house. So after looking culturally, I thought about him for a while, and then it just started really kind of worrying me, because I'm a mother and that just comes innately. And I started to try to understand if it was something that was not necessarily state-driven, but something that was a trend that was outside of the states as well. Just these kids that just didn't want to really go and have cultural experience or engage with other people at all, not online, not using your cell phone at all, not using your car that has gas in it, not going anywhere. So I went ahead and looked, and this is what I found out. Go ahead. In the 90s, Japan had a financial collapse. This is kind of common knowledge. And out of that, there's some social trends that started happening. There are the creators and then the parasite singles, a sociologist termed. And there are two different people that one person stays at home, works part-time because they're not able to find a full-time job. The other person maybe works, but more is sponsored by their parents, as the other person is sponsored by their parents as well. Anyway, these people exist. There's a large population now, and there's actually, go ahead and click. And then there was a second area of people that just completely pulled away from society. and they didn't go outside of their house. Now, I'm not saying my au pair was like this, because he wasn't at all. But these were the things that I found in Japan. Go ahead. And then in the UK, they're starting to do studies as well on not in education, employment, or training, and this all compounds from not having an economic support system. So you have over 40% of the younger population not enabled to have a job, so therefore they're not engaging in society, the norm or the moral that we've created as part of our social spectrum. So go ahead. And then you have the same thing in Germany. I like the first name. They call them Hotel Mama. It's Nesthocker, though, are little tiny baby birds. And go ahead. And in Spain, it was interesting because it was first they made $1,000, then they made $600, then they weren't being supported by the parents and they weren't involved in anything in society. And then later, they were hippies with dogs and playing the flute. After that, you had Italy, and these were big babies. Although Italy is a little different because I think culturally, they like to have their children stay in the house longer than what is the standard in America. So this one is a little different, but the picture I thought was too cute. Go ahead. And then in Greece, they are also, because of the financial collapse, they call it the 700 generation, and I think now it's going down to like 580. Greece is actually interesting because they've had a lot of support from the middle class, distributing food to food shelters, but now that the middle class has been pinched so significantly, they're not seeing the substantial amounts of foods that they used to see a couple years back. In the Middle East and Northern Africa, they call they call them stuck in waithood, which is your being delayed until adulthood. You're taking maybe 10 to 15 years, so you're not entering at 28, but you're entering at like 38 later in life. And then all the way over in Brazil, this is somebody that's sponsored. So it's a child that's being sponsored, financially sponsored by their parent. And then I eventually made myself back to America and looked at a couple things. There's these are all men. So Generation Boomerang, these are kids that leave the house and then they come back, and it's all financially based. Can't have jobs, or there's no jobs, so they're working part-time. And then Twixter and our emerging adulthood. It's the same thing as waithood. It's a late entry. And then go ahead. And then this is my favorite, basement dwellers, which was kind of familiar with the Japanese culture, the people that just don't leave your life. I mean, these are all social ideas that we all have embedded in our head. But they really do exist. There is a subculture that's being substantiated by these numbers. So go ahead. What I noticed, though, mostly is that with all of these cultures, that the capitalistic cultures.
Oh, sorry.
That there are significant amounts of unjustified violence, or violence that's outside of the cultural norm. It's not murder out of passion. It's just violence for pleasure. So, and I thought that was really kind of sad and really kind of interesting. So, go ahead. So there are a couple things that I looked at. Go ahead. I looked at some of the what I call economic realities. There's the adult babies theories that people were just babies and they didn't want to go into the real life, and you have the parents that are just like, I just want the kid out of my house, he's just being a child about everything. And then you have the other theorists who are saying, well, we're in the midst of an economic transformation and there just aren't jobs for these kids. And you have statistics that show that there are some places in America, there are some African Americans that have 60% unemployment to 80% unemployment rates. And this is from that age group to 18 to 24 in the US. They track 16 to 24, I'm sorry. And it's been the lowest since the employment rate of teenagers has been the lowest since 1948. And what sociologists are saying is that this changes your dynamic, because what you have culturally is that you learn what's to be expected, you learn the dream, you learn, what the society promises the person, and then it becomes cyclical in your brain. But unfortunately, with these kids in this generation, they're learning that there's not really anything being offered for them, and then you see a break in society. Go ahead. There are a lot of demographic side effects to this, which I really thought was interesting, because since the 90s, we saw a real dip in teenage pregnancy. We had a lot of economic success, and then teenage pregnancies. And granted, there were other social programs involved, but teenage pregnancies took a dip. Now, they suspect that teenage pregnancies are going to spike again. They also say that there's going to be delayed marriage because nobody has the economic means to do so. There's low education. Jim killing me. There is a low educational attainment. Well, right now, that's not the case in the United States, because you actually see a lot of people continuing to go to school. But we talk about cost, and we think about what's the return on that cost. And I know that there's been more and more articles about that. Another thing that Catherine Newman, she's an anthropologist, and she believes is that there's also low political participation, which could be a side effect of these things.
You want to go the right way?
Yeah, I want you to go the right way. So there are two different groups that they call these people, especially the violent people. They'll say either they're a failed joiner, or they're acting in group behavior. And I think this is what's interesting about social change, is when it does change, usually we just blanket it with one term. A lot of the violent situations that happen in the States and elsewhere, we say, oh, well, they're loners. Well, they're not really loners. They're people that have tried and tried and tried to be a part of a group, and they have unsuccessfully done so. And where they're reacting is in usually small towns. In Japanese, they have the term snapping, and these are the kids that just go out and start murdering people. In cities, it's a little different, because it's not a failed joiner, it's somebody that is actually acting in group behavior. Cities have a higher unemployment, or not higher, but the same unemployment rate, but it's not as small and conducive, so it has multiple facets of social cultural. And so these kids are in groups, and what they're doing is the failed joiners are acting in of love and belonging, and they're seeking that. And the people that are in groups are just working off their esteem, which is, having the confidence and the respect of their social peers. And what's changed is that the group behavior of some of these people, and not everybody, but some of them, is that we all know of mob flashes, and I put videos, and we don't have to watch videos. They're just there for anybody that wants to see them later. But we know what a mob flash is. Everybody gets a call, we go out and dance, and we have a great time. And then they have mob robs, which everybody texts, everybody gets the call, and you go out and you ransack a store. You're having just as much of a good time robbing the store as you're having dancing out in the middle of Times Square. It's just two different versions of what's defined as fun, and it's a real social break where we believe, or one group believes, that this is what it should be, and another group believes, well, this is what it is, because that dream of whatever this society is saying is true, or reality, is no longer the reality, and this is the reality of fun, or defined fun. Another thing that's interesting for me is that there's a game that kids play, and it started, I believe, in St. Louis, and it's stripped up the coast. It's called Knockout King, and this is just a very macho way of saying that you're really cool and you're strong and you have self-esteem and respect of other people. And that's basically if Jim's walking down the street and Christopher and I are walking on the other way and we see Jim and we're just like, okay, if you knock him out one punch, you're going to be really great. And so they go around, they knock out these people, and it's horrible. But you see it everywhere. You don't really see a lot of news, but you see the trend prevailing, and it's gone to the UK and it's gone to bits of California. So it's just an interesting trend. And then you have the homeless homicides have spiked significantly. So unfortunately, a lot of those aren't really proven. Nobody knows who killed them, but police. I've spoken to police in Houston, police in New Orleans, and it's just interesting the stories that they tell and the stories that are told by video cameras, surveillance cameras that actually took them. And okay, go ahead. So trying to understand the social dynamic of where society is and the emerging trends that are supposed to be taking that transfer or making up that transformational gap in our economy, you look at the creative class, you look at the sharing economies, and I had to put Andy's book in there because it really talks about all of the cultural change and the adopting of this new and great way of living, which is nice for the people that are part of that rise. But unfortunately, every min has a max, and every max has a min. So go ahead. And trying to understand the cities and where these creative or new developed economies were being creative. I looked at many, but Boulder I picked specifically to be part of my presentation because it was the first in the United States to put the smart grid in, and it's trying to be the technologically most advanced city. Click once. What I found is kind of interesting, but I thought that it was to be expected as well. So where the smart grid is, how should I explain this? I'll say this. Every dot is an open access network. So you're pretty much in Pearl Street in this area. You're pretty much available to the internet access. Everybody should be, don't click, Jim. You should be available for the internet. They do have 2 wide or live webcam feeds of Pearl Street. They also have school districts around the area where you see the rabbit, which is voltage, I believe, voltage or something. And that's kids that wear helmets with RFIDs that go back and forth to school, so their parents get a text message to let them know that their kids arrived to school. So they're trying to take on these new social desires of having open access and being more community, but they're also attaching themselves to the technological advances that only certain people can afford. And another thing that's really interesting is generally within certain areas like this, there are always sit-lie ordinances. And there are many sit-lie ordinances in Boulder. And these areas, specifically where the red flags are on the street in the park, are where they're actually enforced in numbers versus the rest of the town. And so what I really noticed is that people that didn't have business on Pearl Street were not invited to Pearl Street. And if you were sitting down and you weren't shopping, or you weren't there, or you're having lunch in the park and you weren't really supposed to belong there, then you're asked to leave. And if you were asked to leave, then you're ticketed. And if you weren't ticketed, then you're permanently removed. Go ahead.
Just real quick, what were the ordinances called?
Sit, lie.
Sit or lie?
Sit, yeah, lie. And there are ordinances. That's the beginning of them. There are ordinances about homeless people having dogs and asking for money. There's ordinances about asking for cigarettes. Ordinances about it just goes on and on. Once you have a city that has that starts these ordinances, usually they'll tack on more and more and more. I think Las Vegas is probably the best example of the city with the most ordinances. So I thought about how this could alter the landscape, because I am studying futurist, probably. And I thought of a lot of things, and this is my, go ahead. Mainly, I really thought about who was going to be included in this next horizon and who was going to be really excluded. Go ahead. And trying to understand who valued knowledge in society and who valued strength. And go ahead. And understanding the security laws, both federal and state, and then local. And local laws are where you find a lot of the sit-lie ordinances and whatnot. Go ahead. And understanding how these smart communities or these enriched economic areas are infused with technology that helps those laws. Go ahead. And mostly I thought about education and the how much you have to invest today and where the payoff is and if that's going to plateau. Because a lot of people were thinking about that and I'm wondering when it may not be beneficial, when it may be beneficial. So go ahead. And what I found and what I think is there are a lot of economic and governmental ways of making it a very divided class, which we have seen in our past, we've seen everywhere, and I think that has the possibility of exclusion, and right now we're in the midst of having legal exclusion, and I think that if it continues, it could possibly be a true divided state where you're having in the city a division of who can enter, who cannot enter, especially with technology, if it keeps going the way that it does. Go ahead. A multiplicity is really more of a delusion idea of that everything can happen at the same time, and you can have multifaceted small state, small governmental agencies, which we have right now, and I think is probably the most probable is that you have each individual area, but then eventually it will become somebody's more tight security and rules based, and other people are on base with what we're doing currently, and you'll see the divide of populations of who can and who can't. Go ahead. The renew and reclaim is the renewable energies, and everybody's going to have a one big kumbaya, but I really looked into a lot of the different agencies out there, and I tried to see if how many nonprofits were being opened and registered through the government, and you don't really see. I saw that really spike or flatlining, so I'm not really sure where that's going to go. But there's a lot of talk about how this is the new peaceful movement. So go ahead. And the access to entry, which we talked about earlier. So go ahead. One more. It's kind of small. Okay, so what I tried to understand is which cities and where would the probability of the cities taking action and each of my different future. And I mapped out some of the best cities and some of the worst cities as far as crime rate, and also where there is infrastructure movements being made and projected to be made. And what I think was really interested in is places like, go ahead. Places like Austin, where you have a smart society. It's a neighborhood. It's not so much an individual building, but it's a neighborhood. It's all on a smart grid. It all has sit-lie ordinances in effect, and you're not really, you can enter, but you quickly are removed if you're not part of that. It's on a grid, and it's considered one of the creative classes. Go ahead. something that doesn't have either, but I think is an interesting city to watch, is Las Vegas. Zappos, the owner of Zappos has invested a lot of money into redoing the downtown. And a lot of these downtown areas that he has, he talks about the monetary entry, but then it's all going to be live streamed, and so that's one area. And they have a lot of sit light ordinances, so it would keep certain people out. Go ahead. And San Francisco and around San Francisco, although they don't have, from my knowledge, and not that I could find, certain communities or campuses, a lot of not college campuses, but business campuses. You okay? But these are all areas that have really smart societies, really economic booms, but then they're straddled by really negative or high crime rates. And I think that in the future, it's important to keep attention to these places, because these are going to be, like California is a prime example of 60% unemployment. And when you have 60% unemployment and you're taking a different curve in society and what you think is fun and what is fun for the rest of the society, then that other society is going to have to have protection or certain things in place. And when those things start to happen, and I believe they've started incrementally, then we'll really have a true divide. And go ahead. And that's why my major question was, are the youth really are they opting out, which a lot of people say? Are they grown-up babies and they're not really choosing to be part of society, and they are choosing to opt out and they want to have their own way, or are they being forced out? And I think to answer my overall question is, I think that in time we'll see that some are opting out, not necessarily because there was a choice, but some are definitely being forced out. And I think that as security measures go on, that will time will tell. So go ahead. So that was my presentation that I gave, and did I lapse as long as you wanted?
That was perfect.
And I think it's just interesting. To me, it was interesting for a kid that never left my house, and to see that some of these kids that never leave are not going to be the people that are on the upswing and the great transformation, of the economy that everybody talks about. And there's going to be a huge downcrease. Now, I don't know. It's depressing.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Janet. Would you like us to open up the microphones now?
Yeah.
Okay, Christopher, if you could open it up.
Okay. The only thing is, I don't know how we're gonna have the audio come out, so.
Oh, because we don't have an out audio?
I do, but. I mean, we did have another, we had a question already from Rudolph.
Oh, okay.
This question was, let's see. Oh, what influence does modern media play in disconnecting these younger people from social groups?
I really wanted to look into that, and but I thought it would take me on it, and I'm really, I really have scope creep anyway, so I really wanted to look into media and how media influences. I think a lot of studies have already been done on that, and it just depends on your PowerPoint presentation on which way you want to lie the evidence. I know it's being reintroduced again, how media sensationalizes certain behaviors, but I think that it definitely helps diffusion rate. because there's copycat, but as far as what it has to do with unemployment, I don't think it has anything really to do with unemployment. I think unemployment is just one of the major keys to being involved in society. It's, you know, it's what our nation was kind of built on, that whole Locke theory of, you know, property and prosperity. But if you can't have those, then you're not really buying into the whole gamut, if that makes sense.
So Janet, Emily says, have you created alternative scenarios in this space? Is there anything that you look at alternatively?
Well, I looked at alternative scenarios from specific segments within the space, not from the overall space, because I think that there are just too many multiple factions of society to really give an overall alternative spaces. So I looked at the creative class and Jane Jacobs and the parks and public space, that they're trying to reclaim the actual space and make it more conducive, and how that adapts people in, but only if they believe in that same system, and then only if they're believing in the same respect system. And I did an ethnographic research at Discovery Green this past semester, trying to understand the behavior that the park patrons had, and they're different. You know, it's not your atypical person. So I think it's very factionist, and I don't think I could give an overall landscape, because I think it would be too generalized.
Here's another question from Brian Alexander. He says, do you anticipate increased intergenerational tensions as Generation Screwed confronts elders they perceive as well off?
Or even peer groups that are well off too?
Yeah, I think there's already a backlash. Yeah. You know, it's interesting because there are elderly communities that are being built that have a much higher sense of technology infused, as far as sensors and as far as who's on campus, who's not on campus. So yeah, I think that there could be a backlash, but and you know, the ones who are able to are maybe protected from that backlash at this moment.
So I'm wondering if that question was more along the Occupy Wall Street kind of lines. You know,
How so?
Well, so do you anticipate increased intergenerational tensions in Generation Screwed confronts elders they perceive as well off? So in other words, they're looking at the elders that are on Wall Street, so to speak, and then here they're looking at the 1%, let's say.
More revolution type stuff?
No, I don't think that it's that organized. I think that it would just be no, I don't
see that. Okay.
it wasn't that organized, because there was increased gang activity, but it was more hate groups. It wasn't more interstate gang activity. It was more just increased hate groups, was just as racial tension to me.
And then Rudolph Kabutz asks, what roles will social media networks play in the new technologically advanced communities for social cohesion? It's a very interesting question. So your social camps, what do you think social media networks will do for them?
Well, if you look at the Tor or TOR, which is a browser that you can download, and this is a social media that doesn't allow your identity to be accessed. So there's a society on the web right now that's a black market society, and I know that Heather did Bitcoin, and they use Bitcoin as trade. So as far as I think it will continue the way that it is, it will just morph into being more accessible to the people that want to actually use it. I'm going to use Facebook. If I was a criminal, I probably wouldn't do that. I'd probably opt to use this other networking, which is not tracking my identity, and which I'm able to communicate with other people that are like me.
So here's another thing from Rudolph talking about youth that are well connected and this Generation Screwed, and elderly who are disconnected from these social media. Do you have anything on that particular generational tension?
I didn't. No, I didn't look at that.
Okay. Let's see, and then here's.
Chuck's got a question.
Go ahead.
No, Chuck's question is, he's asking, doesn't this highlight a changing or need for change in definition or possibilities for societal contribution? Like, does society need to contribute to pushing this one direction or other?
I think that by nature, we as a society do push towards one. It may just be that this is at the moment the way that I think that society is pushing. It's just, say it again?
It's just, is this showing a need for, society as a whole, I guess, in order to contribute to this changing towards, this direction or another?
If you talk to
Or
certain,
need for a change?
yeah, if you talk to certain groups, if you talk to the people that are part of the Parks for Public Space and all of those movements that are more of a collaborative movement, they'll say, yeah, and that we want to be collaborative and everything's good to go, but then you have another group of people that are not, and it's just it's a blatant, they're not invested, and they don't share the same ethic anymore. And I'm not saying one ethic is better than the other. That's just what I found. So as far as societal movement towards which gain is really the question.
Chuck's question was, is it only within the framework of economic or employment, or is it also a contribution to maybe relationship building or maybe something beyond that?
No, I think that for society, one of our major buy-ins is that you go to school and you have a job, and you're able to obtain the things that we promise as a culture. That's just a basic. Now, those basic abilities and desires and myth create your society, and it rolls onto all the different social norms and social behaviors. And if that myth breaks and it becomes something different, then you're going to have a rollout of different social norms and behaviors. And that's what I tried to get across in the presentation, is that that's beginning to start to shift. More so than it's been, a small sect of people. This is really, it's starting to diffuse. The diffusion rate is starting to be greater, in my opinion.
So Sandra had a question too, and I guess she is pairing Generation Screwed and reframes it as Generation Startup.
Yeah.
I think that that's interesting too.
No, I think that's like the polar opposite. If we had a bell curve, startups on one side, and a big chunk of it is the screwed side.
Right, and then I guess another question is, is either screwed or startup, is there hope within more global and interconnected urbanization that may be happening for the world?
Well, I do think that within the societies that are technologically infused and that have more connectivity, I just think that when that happens, you're going to have the certain people that are the generation startup that are part of that. And then you have another chunk of society that's not going to be part of that. And that's where your security measures will come in. And that's where it will be more of a divide, because you'll have to protect those things, because you can't have people go mob robbing everything. You can't have people that don't invest in what costs a lot of money. You can't disperse that across the board, because it's just financially impossible. Like Boulder, for instance, the smart grid wasn't even a real success. They weren't, because of the train, it was just too expensive to even lay what they wanted to lay down, and so it became, instead of 50,000 houses, it became 5,000 houses. And that, wonder who got those 5,000 houses that are on the smart grid. And I think that's what you'll see. And that's just financial. And then it's not necessarily bad. It's just you have that society bubbling, and you have a society decreasing.
And do you see, and Rudolph actually, to carry that further, do you see there's a smart connection between communities that are like that stimulate creativity? I guess probably the more connected communities, does that stimulate creativity, these smart connections?
They're not open, it's not as open as you think that these society, they're a very small section of the city and small area of the city, so does it spill over to the rest of the city, if that's what they're asking? I don't really see that I don't think that it has the momentum or the velocity to spill over at this moment, because it's just a startup, you know, these are all beginning, I think eventually, but right now it won't, I don't think.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and that's going to wrap us up for this virtual gathering. Let's see, we've got some interesting things coming in from Brian Alexander and Rudolph, so let's take a look. Yeah, take a breather, Janet. Thank you.
Oh, I don't, that's fine. I was trying to read, I can't though, it's too far away.
Oh, here we go. He's talking about geography. Brian wants to know, do you think Generation Screwed will head to the country, partaking of the local food revolution?
You know, it's funny, as I work with an economist, or I was talking with another professor on campus last semester while I was doing, during the summer, or while I was doing this, and it was interesting because we talked about migration patterns and what happens when you don't have when you have a population that no longer is being supplied what they need, and migration is just a natural part of human nature, and I think that I think cities are still the main source, but I think that, you know, if you talk about, I know I'm going on geographically, I think that you'll see migration, but I don't, that's a hard one.
Yeah, that's good. I think actually Jim Lee's got some work going on in that area.
Oh, that's cool, Jim.
Right, Jim Lee's betting on urban homesteading, he says. Joyce Goya says, most of the younger people I know want to stay in urban areas.
Right.
Yeah.
But define urban. Do you mean New York or do you mean Boulder? Because to me, Boulder is not urban, but it's urban.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's the definition of urban is kind of loose. Now it's, you know, I want to be in a place that's connected. I don't know.
That's very good.
Rudolph had a question too. Let's see. Are some youth opting to disconnect from society around them, even though they may be connected widely with people elsewhere?
Yeah.
People far away.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that they're opting out of being connected, period. I'm saying some youth are opting out of being connected to what's our norm today, and into a new norm. And those new norms, be it a creative class, be it a sharing class, be it something else, these are all different multifacets or factions that are going on. But then you also have a bubble of people that are opting out of the system completely and opting into a little bit more aggressive, what I would condone as more aggressive behavior.
One thing that I thought about what you were saying is that, you know, when you have here, some of these kids they're almost disconnecting from the norm, like you said, but through this constant connection of everything else. So you have a disconnection
The media,
and a connection at the same time.
It's not, technology is not what makes society. It's all the underlying myths and beliefs and what we buy into to create a story. And, you know, technology is just a way of communicating and a tool. And you can use that tool in any way. It doesn't necessarily have to tell my story. It could tell somebody else's story just as well. And that's, I guess, what I'm trying to get across is that there's a group of people that are telling a totally different story right now. And to me, it's the innovative, it's moving. I think it's growing.
Okay.